This is week 2 of Jotham's journey, storybook of Advent. So if you have an Advent wreath, you can light 2 candles starting today. And our story today is called Urns and Scrolls. And we have another picture that you can look at for a little bit part of the story. Nathan sat perfectly still, his eyes and ears searching the air for a hint of who was outside the cave. Jotham's heart jumped as the clatter of falling rocks pierced the silence once more. Nathan stood carefully so as not to make a sound, and crept silently over to the mouth of the cave. Staying in the shadows, he peeked outside. Once again, broken bits of rock fell, and this time Nathan saw that they fell right in front of the cave entrance. Decca's men were surrounding the cave, he realized. Nathan motioned for Jotham to come to him, then whispered in his ear. "I will distract them," he said. "Run down the hill as fast as you can, but do not go back to Qumran. Go to Jericho, a half-day's walk to the north. Find there a merchant named Silas. He is a friend." Jotham's eyes grew wide, and he rapidly shook his head no, but Nathan gave him a stern look and wagged his finger at him as if to say, "Mind me." Jotham hung his head and nodded silently. He didn't want to leave Nathan, who would surely be killed. The thought of Nathan dying just to save Jotham made Jotham's heart ache like it never had before. "All this is happening because I couldn't mind Father," he thought, and tears started running down his face. Nathan put on the fool's hat, then held up 3 fingers and counted with them. 3, 2, 1. As the last finger dropped, Nathan ran screaming out of the cave. Jotham followed, a step behind, crying. He ran right past Nathan, who had stopped and turned toward their attackers. He wasn't exactly sure which way to go, but started climbing down as fast as he could. His heart was racing, and he knocked his knee hard on a rock. Behind him he heard Nathan screaming, and the sound made Jotham shake uncontrollably. "Jotham, come back!" he heard behind him. It was Decca's men, and he wasn't about to listen to them. "Jotham, come!" the voice called again. "It's all right." This time the voice had a funny sound to it, Jotham thought. It sounded almost like Nathan. Jotham stopped and turned, looked back up the hill. There he saw Nathan standing in front of the cave, hands on his hips, and he was laughing. Laughing! For a moment Jotham didn't understand, but then he saw a flock of goats grazing on some tufts of grass above the cave, and suddenly he understood, and then he began to laugh too. Jotham felt the fear of a moment ago flow down from his head and out through his toes. They both stood there laughing at themselves for being scared by some goats, but mostly they were just relieved. Jotham decided then and there to be nice to every goat he ever met from then on. Nathan stopped laughing and motioned Jotham to come quickly. Nathan followed his friend's gaze, and then he too saw the men climbing into the hills far below. He scrambled back up the rocks and into the cave, Nathan right behind him. "They will not find us," Nathan assured Jotham. "There are thousands of caves up here, and this is the least obvious of all. That is why we chose it for our library." Jotham wasn't so sure about their safety. He figured if goats could find them, so could Decca's men. But he moved to the back of the cave and sat again among the urns that held the Holy Scriptures. "What's a library?" Jotham asked after a while. "It is a place where writings are collected and stored, such as the Holy Scriptures behind you." Jotham looked again at the clay urns, then asked, "Will you read some to me?" Nathan looked toward the mouth of the cave, trying to decide if it was safe to read aloud. "All right," he said finally, "but you must sit close so I can read softly." Jotham watched as Nathan made a torch from a stick of wood and a strip of cloth, lighting it with a flint stone against the wall of the cave. Then slowly he eased the top off one of the urns and pulled out the roll of a yellow parchment wrapped in sheepskin. He bowed slightly and said a short prayer which Jotham didn't understand, then carefully unrolled the parchment and began to read. Nathan read stories such as Jotham had never heard before. Jotham knew the big stories, of course, like Noah and Moses, but Nathan was reading him stories of men like Samson, Gideon, and David. "So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone," Nathan read. "Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him." "How can that be?" Jotham exclaimed. A young boy against such a giant? Nathan patted Jotham on the shoulder. Fear was a powerful weapon you give to your enemy, Jotham, Nathan said, whether that enemy is a Philistine or a jackal. David gave his fear to Jehovah, and in turn Jehovah made David a strong and powerful man. Jotham nodded his head. Then Nathan kept reading. He was despised and rejected of men, he read, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Surely he took our weaknesses and carried our sorrows, yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our sins. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. Jotham looked puzzled. Who is that talking about? He asked. These are the words of Jehovah as spoken by the holy prophet Isaiah, Nathan answered, and they speak of the Messiah. Jotham's eyes grew wide. But I thought the Messiah was coming to kill the Romans. Nathan nodded. Yes, that is what many think, but Isaiah clearly tells us that it is the Messiah who will suffer and die. He will suffer and die to pay for our sins, just like the lambs we sacrifice for our sin offering. This was all quite new and puzzling to Jotham. What about the Bethlehem story you told me yesterday? Nathan drew another scroll from the urn, then said, These are the words of Jehovah as spoken by the holy prophet Micah. But you, O Bethlehem, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come from me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from ancient times. Does that mean that Bethlehem is very old? No, Nathan said. It means that the one who comes from Bethlehem, the Messiah, is from ancient times. It means the Messiah has existed since the beginning of all things. So he's an old man in Bethlehem? Nathan chuckled. No, Jotham, the Messiah will come as the holy prophet Isaiah told us. Unto you a child is born, to us a son is given. But whose son? Jotham asked, exasperated. And how can one who is old be a baby? Nathan carefully set the scroll down, then looked Jotham in the eye. The Messiah is from of old, but will still be born as a baby because the Messiah, Jotham, is the Son of God. Jotham's eyes grew wide. He had never heard such a thing. The Messiah, the Son of God? It seemed ridiculous. Did you check that one? The voice coming in from outside the cave shocked them both, and they instantly fell quiet. It had come from some distance away, but still close enough that they could hear the men talking. I'll check it then, the voices said, and Jotham began to tremble again. Be calm, little one, Nathan whispered as he smothered the torch in the dirt. They are still far off, and he hugged Jotham close. They sat there together silently for a long time, and finally the light began to fade. Occasionally they heard the men talking, but it was always far away. As he sat there, Jotham thought of the things that Nathan had said and began to understand how the Messiah really could come as a baby instead of a king, like he had always been taught. As the cave grew dark, Jotham's eyes became heavy, and soon he fell asleep. The next thing he knew, the cave was light again, and Nathan was shaking him awake. Jotham, wake up, Nathan hissed. Decca's men are right outside.